Hey everybody, I'm really sorry that I'm not able to be with you in person. I think I would really enjoy a conversation with all of you about David Bowie. So instead, I'm just going to send along this little video and hopefully give you some points to ponder, maybe some things to argue about, perhaps just some perspectives on Bowie, a favorite topic of conversation and enjoyment for me, something that really has been lifelong. I'm old enough and therefore in many ways lucky enough to have lived through and with the arc and the trajectory of David Bowie's career, essentially since its at least its public explosion, really in the late 60s, but for me, coming of age in the 70s, and the 70s when Bowie became this looming figure in British and then global pop culture, whose music has accompanied me throughout the rest of my life. And so, Bowie had this practice that he employed um, regarding lyrics, where he initially applied this kind of cut up thing that came, I think, from surrealists and Dadaists, and maybe even from the poet William Burroughs. I'm not sure, I can't remember now. And I didn't research that point again because I just decided to say this to explain what I'm going to be doing. But Bowie had this practice where he would sort of cut up lyrics and put the lyrics in a bag, and then the ideas for the song would come out. He eventually got a computer program that did that. So he would have lyrics for a song, and then they get fed into a program and kind of spat out in an entirely different way. And there's a kind of an organized random chaos to that I think makes his work artistically kind of interesting. But it's also going to be my excuse for how I'm going to talk to you for the next 10 minutes, because I decided to take a bit of a random approach. And rather than trying, because I spent some time trying to go, oh, so what should I say? What should I talk about? And there are so many elements and so many aspects. So I thought what I'd do is I took about 15 minutes before this, and I wrote down some ideas that I just want to throw out. And so if you like, they're a little bit of my cut and paste words of the life of Bowie, and I think the implications of his artistry for me, but also perhaps for you, for those of you that know him well, for those of you perhaps who are just on a voyage of discovery with Bowie. And so I wrote a few things down. I'll refer to those. So if I look down, it's not because I'm ignoring you; it's because I want to remember what it was that I had to say. But I am going to start with a quote from Bowie, from 1995. I have it in my phone. I must have used it somewhere else. And when I was trying to make a note yesterday about something, I sort of looked through all my notes, and there this was. That was information you didn't need, but you know. So this is what Bowie said in 1995, and I think this was in advance of the release of the album Reality, perhaps, but don't quote me because I'm not one of those people. I don't know when every album came out and how many tracks there are and who played on it, and the number of grooves in the album or anything like that. I'm just not that person. But anyway, taking the present philosophical line, we don't expect our audience to necessarily seek an explanation from ourselves. He's talking about him and Brian Eno, who was his producer at the time. We assign that role to the listener and to culture. Ah, this is from Outside, or The Lodger. Yeah. As both of these are in a state of permanent change, there will be a constant drift in interpretation. All art is unstable. Its meaning is not necessarily that implied by the author. There is no authoritative voice. There are only multiple readings. Just a couple of things. All art is unstable, and I think what Bowie is hinting at, and I think what's always important to remember about art, whether we're looking at visual art or listening to the oral arts, music, that they are unstable in the sense that meanings within the arts shift and change for both, I think, the listener and the creator. If you go and see Bob Dylan, he constantly frustrates his audience by kind of inventing new melodies for very familiar and very well loved and treasured old songs, or perhaps reconfiguring lyrics or stuff like that. And sometimes, you listen to a song at one point in your life and it carries some kind of meaning. You listen to it again at a later point in your life. It's almost like it's become something else. I think that happens with many things. If you have a kind of orientation towards life, the things aren't always as static as we imagine them to be, just because they've been printed or stamped or recorded. There's something inherent in the chemistry of artistry that makes it a movable feast. Um, that is constantly shifting and changing as we shift and change. And so Bowie is one of those artists, really, who doesn't really explain and doesn't necessarily reveal, and yet explains and reveals all the time. Anyway, just a couple of things. So Theodore Adorno wrote some essays on music, particularly about Beethoven, and he sort of coined a term, late works and late style, and there's a notion that he put forward about lateness, late styles, and late period work, and his argument was that there was something particular and something special about the work that was produced by an artist as they were approaching the end of their life. And he argued, and he was using, particularly at the time of writing essays, the work of Beethoven towards the end of his life. And he said that the music held a disruptive, catastrophic essence that agitates against prevailing aesthetics and foreshadows something new. So Adorno said that if you look at somebody's late work as they're coming towards the end of their life, there's something that quite often gets revealed in their work, and even as they approach the end, their music seems to throw almost like a resistance. He says a catastrophic essence that agitates against the prevailing aesthetics. And I was thinking about that in terms of the last works, the late works of Bowie, particularly, the album The Next Day, which he released when nobody had heard anything from him for a decade in 2013. And then the musical that he wrote, Lazarus, in 2015. And then, of course, the album Black Star, which was released in 2016, just a couple of days before he died. And all of those works together are such an interesting, disruptive, and catastrophic essence in the sense that they particularly agitate against prevailing ideas and aesthetics, even the artist's own ideas. I mean, if you listen to Bowie's last album, Black Star, which for me actually, and I don't really like to put things in hierarchies of this is my favorite, that's my favorite, because listening changes and meanings shift and move because music doesn't have fixed meaning. But Black Star is an album that I return to again and again and again. And every time I listen, I am just blown away. But you know, it was a very sort of jazz inspired album. He used some musicians that he discovered in a playing in a sort of jazz club in New York, kind of avant-garde, kind of postmodern jazz collective, and he incorporated them into his work. But he also was working with Tony Visconti, who was his earliest and perhaps longest running uh, producer and collaborator in the studio, and they kind of reconnected on a couple of his later albums and were working again. So you have old and new coming together. But there was something, I think, what the great disappointment for me was so many, but the sadness was that there was this kind of foreshadowing of something new in those last works that will never be realized, at least by him. And perhaps what's there then is a reminder about the finitude of life and what you can actually leave perhaps for others to pick up. Now I know you can romanticize the end of someone's life, particularly someone's life who's been very impactful upon you. And there is a tendency, I think, to perhaps over romanticize someone because they've passed, and quite often when they passed unexpectedly, you know, because we tend to eradicate the rough edges and go for the core emotional sentiment that we feel. But I do think with Bowie there was this really interesting coalescing at the end of his life that brought together both the past and the present in a kind of in a new way, and offered up novel ways of thinking about life in general. Now, as I said, I my life has been sort of lovingly curated by Bowie albums along the way, because I happen to have been born when all of those albums came out and were new, and so the impact of his music upon my life it was profound in so many ways. I remember hearing Bowie but not listening, because I grew up in England, essentially listening to kind of R&B and reggae and blues and soul and gospel music, as did many of my peers. And we just really didn't listen to British popular music that much, didn't pay much attention to the Beatles or the Rolling Stones. It was really about black music. So Bowie was there, but I remember being at this party and walking down this hallway and walking into a room where the main party was happening, and Suffragette City was playing on the record player. And it just, for whatever reason, at that particular moment in time, stopped me in my tracks. And I began to listen in a way that I hadn't before. You know, music is all about preferences, and much of our response to music is subjective. I do like this, I don't like that, and it's perfectly okay to say I don't like this music. That's one level of judgment, but there's another level of judgment that requires a little more depth of understanding, I think, wherein you can not like something, but appreciate its worth or value based on its commitment and fulfillment of a particular idea or genre. So, musical genres, you may not like country music, but a good country music song will fulfill a certain criteria that is demanded of a country music song. And you can go, that's a really greatly executed country song or pop songs, I mean, pop songs are masterful works of a particular genre form. You may not like pop music, you may go, oh, top 40 music, it's so disposable, but it's sort of meant to be. So, and it's amazing how many earworm pop songs just keep coming back, and that disposability seems to last a little longer, a bit like plastic in the ocean, it doesn't go away. Um, anyway, so when Bowie and I just have a couple of thoughts, and then I'll be done to leave you with this. But if you look at the arc of Bowie's career, his career was sort of marked by these frequent, arguably surface reinventions. Quite often, there would be new musicians who would bring new things to the table, or a new record producer, be it Brian Eno or Tony Visconti or somebody else, or even new geographic location. I mean, Bowie famously went to New York and produced some great albums. He went to Berlin. With Iggy Pop at one point, and lived in Berlin, and produced a trilogy of albums that are marked by the experience of A, trying to get over a cocaine addiction, and B, being in a city still divided by the Berlin Wall, and making albums there that are marked by a sort of haunting solemnity about the reality of life. And these albums would often be accompanied by a new look. I remember when he was Ziggy Stardust, and then announced on stage that Ziggy was done and Ziggy was retiring from music, and everybody thought that was just the end of Bowie, but it didn't mean the end of Bowie at all. It just meant the end of one particular iteration of Bowie. And then you got the Thin White Duke, and you have all of these visual things. And so often we dismiss surface appearances as, again, inconsequential or lacking meaning. But one of the arguments that I would make with regard to Bowie and part of the arc of meaning, if you like, that you can find in both the man and the music, the art that he made, is that Bowie, as a child of the 20th century, the late 20th century, post two world wars, economic collapse, and after, if you like, for instance, the death of God, lived in a world where, in a sense, both height in terms of the notion of transcendence, and depth in terms of an abandonment of, or at least an attempt to culturally shape free of a certain view of the past, the history and the depth. Those sort of things had collapsed, and part of the condition of late 20th century life was this animation of the surface of existence, and the surface becomes the site, the location of creative and maybe even destructive energy and effervescence. And so it's very easy to sort of look at Bowie, in his androgynous phase, and just go, oh, he was just trying to be cool and hip, and he was using bisexuality because it was so socially unacceptable. It was shocking, he just went for shock value, or his supposed, look, flirtations with perhaps fascism, or whatever it was that Bowie was doing, his supposed romance with Mick Jagger, or all of these sort of the salaciousness around it, the dismissal of the surface, I think should be seen as a much richer sight of the energies of life in the West in the late 20th and now 21st century, where the collapse of height and depth, the way we're trying to reorient ourselves towards the world around us, is actually part of the condition of our existentiality, the way we seek to live life. So Bowie is both surface, and yet the surface is the depth at the same time. The skin carries the story. So the skin of Ziggy Stardust, the skin of the Thin White Duke, the skin of heathen and alien and the outsider, all those things, the musicians, the forms of songs, the structures, they're all hints at what it means to live, because regardless of the period of Bowie's music, and you know, a bit like Picasso or someone else, you can divide them up. His sort of American period, his Berlin period, his pop period, his hit period, his jazz period, so on and so forth. There are thematic continuations that carry on. Alienation, otherness, the existential anxieties of the human condition, and then towards the end, those get combined with kind of meditations on things like family and aging, and even the terror of knowing, not the terror of unknowing, but the terror of knowing, particularly the what Bowie himself called the head spinning dichotomy of the lust for life against the finality of everything. So Bowie was very clear, I think, in his awareness of the relationship between hunger for life and human finitude. So mortality plays a great role in the work of Bowie, as does otherness, which gets manifested in the early space songs, but also in his musings about God and atheism on albums like Heathen and Reality. And he just sort of wrestles through so many things. He says that, you know, he said that those two things, the lust for life and the finality of everything, they rage against each other. And you can hear that raging in both the music and the lyrical singing of Bowie, even his singing style. And particularly if you listen to the raging instrumental breakouts on Black Star, as knowingly coming to the end of his life, aware that he has limited days, um, there's this invitation in the music to embrace both a hunger for life. You feel it, but it's also sobered by the reality of mortality. There's a song on Black Star that begins with the sound of Bowie's breath before he starts to sing. And you can hear both fragility and strength, like someone summoning up just enough breath to get through a song, hoping, if you like, perhaps that there's enough breath to get through the song. I won't tell you the song. You can discover it for yourself. But it's on Black Star and it's worth a look. Anyway, what else? Well, I'll just say, I'll say this and then I'll be done, because I think this is way more than 10 minutes. So I hope they'll probably edit all of this anyway. But anyway, he said, and I'll leave you with this, in an interview. I think it was in Interview magazine. He said that the continuous theme of his work, which might come as a surprise and probably does come as a surprise to many people, given some of his statements, is that it was a search for spiritual sustenance. And this is what he said. He said, everything that I seem to have written in some way or other keeps focusing on the idea that in the late 20th century, we are without our God. We really have to reinvent God. I think that our religious philosophies trail so far behind the way we actually live today that we find ourselves in a spiritual void. My main sort of work is in the realm of radical theology and continental philosophy. And radical theology is very much about God after God and religion after religion. It encompasses post-theism and the collapse of metaphysics and stuff like that. And it seeks a sort of earthbound mysticism, as the philosopher Eugene Thacker spoke of in his book, In the Dust of the Planet. We live in the dust of the planet, and the heights of the verticality between the human and the divine in the West seem to have been eradicated. But longing, human longing and yearning, the question of what it means to be human, that goes on, and that's a search for spirituality, I think. And I think Bowie's music can help us essentially appreciate or at least understand something of the chaos of life, the nature of mortality, and the immortal legacies that we all leave behind. You don't have to be Bowie to leave behind an immortal legacy. We all leave a trace of ourselves in the world because part of us does get left behind in the hearts of those whom we have loved and who loved us. And perhaps if we listen hard to someone like David Bowie, we might be less afraid of our inescapable final destiny and the traces of life that we leave behind. One of my songs that I go to quite often, and I've been using as a philosophical sort of thread of late, is a song off his album The Next Day from 2013 called Where Are We Now? And it's a song and was accompanied by a video which saw Bowie going back to Berlin. And many people dismissed it and said, oh, he's just retreading old ideas. But I don't think that was it at all. I think what it was the artful, creative, disruptive energy of an artist who was very well aware that the past is an inescapable reality in our lives. It's just simply a question of what do we do with our past? Does it haunt us and stifle our ability to live forward? Or is it part of the fabric of existence that we understand as simply one of the threads that leaves us to where we are now? It's a question of sort of existential orientation. We could ask the question, well, where are we now as this culture and a society in the middle of 2024, or almost in the middle of 2024? Or we could use it as a locational question for ourselves. Where am I now? Where do I find myself? And how am I wrestling with the raging notion of the lust for life and the inevitable finality of existence? I'll leave you on that happy note. If you need something happier, you should listen to his novelty song, The Laughing Gnome. I look forward to hearing what you come up with in your discussion. Hope this helps a little bit, or at least adds to the conversation. I could just turn off the I could just turn off the recording.